I always thought my sister would be the death of me, but I never expected her to try to kill my birthday first. My name is Eden, and this morning I turned 28. I'd spent weeks planning a small celebration at my favorite cafe downtown, nothing fancy, just brunch with my family. Kind of quiet gathering where everyone shows up, shares a meal, and maybe pretends to like each other for an hour or two. I should have known better. Eden pushed me. Ivy's scream pierced through the peaceful morning air just as I was setting down my coffee. She was sprawled dramatically across the cafe floor, clutching her ankle like it had been mangled by a bear rather than her own clumsiness. I didn't even touch her, I said, but my voice came out too quiet, too defensive. Already my mother was rushing to Ivy's side, cooing and fussing over her like she was still 5 years old instead of 30. How could you be so careless? My mother shot me a disapproving look while helping Ivy into a chair. You know your sister has sensitive ankles from her dancing days. Right. The 3 months of ballet lessons she took when she was 12. Apparently that qualified as a dancing career in Ivy's revisionist history. My father barely glanced up from his phone. Girls, please. Not today. Not today. The same thing he'd been saying for 28 years whenever Ivy pulled one of her stunts. I watched as the waitress hurried over with an ice pack, clearly concerned. Ivy accepted it with the practiced grace of a seasoned performer, her mascara-rimmed eyes wide with manufactured pain. I just wanted to give my baby sister a birthday hug, Ivy whimpered. I didn't expect her to get so aggressive. That's not what happened, I started to say, but my grandmother Mabel cut me off with a gentle squeeze of my hand under the table. I looked over to find her watching me with knowing eyes. Perhaps we should order, Mabel suggested, her voice carrying just enough authority to redirect everyone's attention. I hear the blueberry pancakes here are divine. But the damage was already done. My carefully planned birthday brunch had become the Ivy show, as usual. I watched my mother flutter around her firstborn while my father retreated further into his phone. The gifts I'd spotted them carrying earlier remained unopened in their bags, forgotten in the drama. Noah, my best friend from college who'd driven 2 hours to be here, leaned over and whispered, "Want me to accidentally spill my mimosa on her new white dress?" I smiled despite myself. Don't tempt me. As everyone settled into ordering, I caught Ivy watching me with that familiar gleam in her eye, the one that always appeared when she'd successfully redirected attention to herself. But there was something different this time, something almost desperate in the way she kept glancing between me and our parents. "Oh!" Ivy suddenly exclaimed, making everyone jump. "I almost forgot. I have some exciting news." She paused for dramatic effect, waiting until all eyes were on her. "Ethan and I had lunch yesterday." My stomach dropped. "Ethan, my fiancé. He was so sweet," she continued, twirling her hair innocently. "We talked for hours about the wedding plans. He had some concerns he wanted to discuss." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Ethan hadn't mentioned meeting my sister. In fact, he'd told me he was working late yesterday. What kind of concerns? I heard myself ask, my voice steady despite the sudden ringing in my ears. Ivy's smile widened just a fraction, like a cat who'd finally cornered its prey. "Oh, you know, just wedding things. But don't worry about it today. It's your birthday, after all." As conversation resumed around us, I felt Mabel's hand squeeze mine again. But this time I barely noticed. All I could think about was Ethan and Ivy and all the little things that suddenly weren't adding up. Happy birthday to me. Christmas at the Hale house always felt like a carefully choreographed performance, with Ivy as the star and the rest of us as her reluctant supporting cast. This year was no different, except now I had the added weight of Ethan's secret lunch with my sister hanging over my head. I hadn't confronted him about it yet. Something held me back. Maybe the same instinct that makes you freeze when you spot a snake in your path. "Eden, darling, could you help in the kitchen?" my mother called out, though she was already elbow-deep in cookie dough with Ivy, their matching festive aprons dusted with flour. I knew what help meant, stand in the corner and hand them things while they bonded over family recipes I was never taught. Actually, I said, I need to finish wrapping presents. My mother's face fell slightly. Oh, well, Ivy and I have it covered then. Course they did. I retreated to the guest room where I'd been staying, my childhood bedroom having long since been converted into Ivy's meditation space, complete with a yoga mat she'd never used and crystals she couldn't name. The room still smelled like the lavender candles she'd insisted on burning during her latest spiritual phase. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Come in, grandmamma belle. She smiled, closing the door behind her. Still have that sixth sense about me, I see. Her eyes landed on the modest pile of presents I'd brought. Need help wrapping? No, I hesitated, then pulled out my phone. Look at this. I showed her the Instagram post I'd been staring at for the past hour. A photo of Ethan at some upscale restaurant, date stamped from yesterday. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was Ivy's distinctive red coat draped over a chair. Mabel's eyes narrowed. Have you talked to him? He says he's been working late every night this week. My voice cracked slightly. Christmas shopping, he said. That boy never could lie worth a damn, Mabel muttered. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but I think you need this now. Inside was a check that made my eyes widen. Grandma, I can't. You can and you will. Her voice was firm. I've watched you dim your light for years, trying to keep the peace. But peace at the cost of your soul isn't peace at all. Before I could respond, Ivy's voice rang through the house. Present time! Downstairs, the living room had transformed into what looked like a department store display. Ivy sat cross-legged by the tree, surrounded by expertly wrapped gifts and coordinating papers. Mom, Dad, these are for you. She handed them each large, expensive-looking packages. My mother unwrapped a designer handbag she'd been casually mentioning for months. My father received a rare first edition of his favorite book. My gifts to them, a handmade photo album for Mom and a vintage fishing lure I'd tracked down for Dad, suddenly felt inadequate in their simple wrapping paper. Eden's turn, Ivy sang out, handing me a small box. Inside was a self-help book, Finding Your Path, a guide for lost souls. I thought you could use it, she said sweetly. Especially with all the wedding stress. I forced a smile, even as I noticed Ethan shifting uncomfortably on the couch. Thanks, Ivy. It's just thoughtful. Oh. She clapped her hands. That reminds me, Ethan and I were talking about the wedding yesterday. I had this amazing idea for your centerpieces. The room went silent. My mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth with a cookie. My father actually looked up from his book. Yesterday, my mother asked carefully, when were you two talking about centerpieces? Ivy's face flickered for just a moment before her smile returned. Oh, you know, when we ran into each other at that new place downtown. Pure coincidence. Right, Ethan? But Ethan wasn't looking at any of us. His eyes were fixed on his phone, his face pale. That's when my own phone buzzed. A text from Noah. Call me now. You need to see something. I stood up, the self-help book falling forgotten to the floor. Excuse me, I said, my voice steady despite the thunder of my heartbeat. I need to take this call. As I left the room, I caught Mabel's knowing look. Whatever Noah had found, it was time to stop dimming my light. Noah's voice crackled through my phone speaker as I huddled in the guest bathroom. You're not going to believe this, but Ethan's been making reservations at the Rosewood Hotel, multiple times over the past month. My fingers went numb against the phone. The Rosewood was where Ivy always stayed when she wanted to clear her head, her words for whenever she needed attention or was plotting something. There's more, Noah continued. I have a friend who works there. She says he's been meeting someone, a woman with long red hair. Ivy's signature feature, the one thing about her that our mother never stopped praising. I ended the call and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. The bathroom door creaked open and Ivy slipped in like a ghost. "Everything okay, sis?" Her concern would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "You've been up here an awfully long time. How long have you been sleeping with my fiancé?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Ivy's face remained perfectly composed, but her hand tightened on the doorknob. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly. "Is this about lunch yesterday? I told you we were just discussing wedding plans. At the Rosewood Hotel?" A flicker of something surprise, fear, crossed her face before she recovered. "Eden, you're being paranoid. This is exactly why I got you that self-help book. You've always had such trust issues." "Stop." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "Just stop lying. For once in your life, tell me the truth." She studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Not her usual practiced smile, but something darker. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I've been seeing Ethan. For months now. And you know what? He came to me. Said he was tired of living in my shadow, always being known as Ivy's sister's fiancé. The irony might have made me laugh if I wasn't fighting back tears. "You couldn't let me have this one thing, could you?" "One thing?" Ivy's voice rose slightly. "You got everything. Grandma's attention, Dad's pride when you got into college, Mom's worry when you moved away. Poor little Eden, so independent, so different from her attention-seeking sister." "That's not—" "I had to fight for every scrap of attention," she continued, her composure cracking. "Do you know what it's like to watch your perfect little sister swan off to college while everyone praises her bravery? To hear Mom and Dad whisper about how you're the sensible one, the stable one?" A knock at the door made us both jump. "Eden." It was Ethan. "Your mother is asking for you both. Dinner's ready." Ivy's mask slipped back into place so quickly it was terrifying. "Coming," she called cheerfully. Then, in a whisper to me, "Don't make a scene. It's Christmas, after all." She opened the door to find Ethan standing there, looking uncertain. The way his eyes darted between us told me everything I needed to know. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I think it's time for some truth at the dinner table." Ivy grabbed my arm. "Eden, don't—" But I was already moving past her, past Ethan, down the stairs. Behind me I heard their hurried footsteps, their urgent whispers. The dining room fell silent as I entered. My mother was just setting down her prized Christmas roast, my father actually looking up from his phone for once. Grandma Mabel watched me with knowing eyes. "Eden," my mother's anxious voice. "What's wrong?" I looked at my sister and my fiancé, now hovering in the doorway like guilty shadows. Then at my parents, who had spent years choosing peace over truth. Finally at Mabel, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I have an announcement," I said, reaching for Grandma's check in my pocket. "I'm going back to school. And I'm going alone." The roast hit the table with a thud as my mother's hands began to shake. Behind me I heard Ivy's sharp intake of breath. This wasn't revenge, not yet. But as I stood there, watching my carefully constructed world crumble, I realized it was something better, freedom. 3 months into my return to college, I got the first text from my mother. "Ivy's engaged to Ethan." I deleted it without responding and went back to highlighting my business law textbook. My tiny studio apartment felt like a fortress, just me, my studies, and blessed silence. "No drama, no performances, no." My phone buzzed again. This time from an unknown number. "Eden, it's Ethan. Please let me explain." I blocked that one too. The next morning, Noah was waiting outside my first class with coffee and that look he gets when he's about to say something I won't like. "Your sister's engagement announcement is trending locally." Of course it is. I took the coffee, burning my tongue on purpose. Pain felt better than thinking about them. "There's something else." Noah pulled out his phone, showing me a local news article. Your grandmother's community garden project? The one she's been working on for decades? The city's selling the land to developers. Ivy's leading the campaign to turn it into luxury condos. My coffee cup crumpled in my hand, hot liquid spilling over my fingers. The garden was Mabel's life work, the only place I'd felt truly safe growing up, where she'd taught me about patience, growth, and standing my ground. She knows exactly what she's doing, I said, wiping my hand on my jeans. This isn't about condos. It's about hurting Grandma to get to me. Noah's expression darkened. There's a city council meeting tonight. Public comments welcome. I can't, I said quickly. I have an exam tomorrow and… Eden. Noah's voice was gentle but firm. You've been hiding in your books for months. Maybe it's time to plant your feet and grow something of your own. Council chamber was packed when I arrived. Ivy stood at the podium in a perfectly tailored suit, her red hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This development project will bring jobs, revenue, and modern housing to our community, she was saying. The old garden, while charming, serves only a handful of elderly residents who… That's not true. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Heads turned as I stood. The garden serves hundreds of families, provides fresh produce to 3 local food banks, and runs education programs for schools. Ivy's smile didn't waver. Eden, how lovely to see you. Though I'm surprised you'd take time from your studies to discuss local politics, especially given your limited experience with community development. Limited experience? I walked toward the podium, my voice stronger with each step. I grew up in that garden. I watched Grandma Mabel build it from nothing while you were too busy staging accidents and stealing boyfriends to notice what actually matters. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ivy's smile cracked slightly. Always so dramatic, she said softly. This is why Ethan chose. Don't. I was close enough now to see her hands trembling slightly on the podium. This isn't about Ethan. This is about you destroying something beautiful because you can't stand seeing others grow. The council will vote next week, she snapped, mask slipping. And when they do, they'll have all the documentation showing how the garden meets protected status requirements. I pulled out a thick folder. Every volunteer hour, every donation, every educational program documented and certified. Grandma Mabel taught me more than just gardening. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in Ivy's eyes. She grabbed my arm as I turned to leave, her nails digging in. Why can't you just let me win? She hissed. Just once. I looked at her hand on my arm, then into her eyes. Because some things are worth fighting for. As I walked out, my phone buzzed with a text from Grandma Mabel. The seeds of change need strong roots to grow. Come over tomorrow. We have work to do. For the first time in months, I smiled. Ivy might have taken my fiancé, but she'd forgotten the most important lesson from the garden. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I was done being pruned back. The city council voted to protect the garden, but Ivy wasn't done fighting. She announced her wedding date, the same weekend as the garden's annual fundraising festival. Of course, everyone was expected to attend her intimate celebration of 300 guests. I was elbow-deep in soil when Noah brought me the news. Your mother called. She's crying about family obligations and tradition. The garden festival has been tradition for 40 years, I said, yanking out a particularly stubborn weed. Ivy knows that. She's telling people you're trying. Noah handed me a water bottle. Your mom wants you to help with the wedding. Says it might be the last chance to repair the family. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Repair what? The family was never whole to begin with. Later that evening, I found Grandma Mabel sitting on her porch, looking older than I'd ever seen her. The hospital called, she said without preamble. The tests came back. 6 months, maybe less. The world tilted sideways. No. There must be. Eden. Her voice was firm. I need you to listen carefully. The garden isn't just plants and soil. It's hope, community, something bigger than ourselves. She pressed a folder into my hands. These papers need your signature. I'm making you the legal guardian of the garden trust. But Ivy, we'll fight it. Of course she will. Mabel's eyes sparkled with their old fire. That's why we're not telling her. Not yet. My phone buzzed, Ivy's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Finally. Her voice dripped honey. Listen, I've been thinking. You should be my maid of honor. I nearly dropped the phone. What? It's perfect. Show everyone we've moved past all that unpleasantness. Plus, Mother's absolutely beside herself with worry about the family image. The family image, I repeated. You mean like how it'll look when you marry my ex-fiancé on the same day as Grandma's festival? Oh, that old thing? She laughed lightly. Eden, be reasonable. It's just gardening. This is my wedding. Besides, Grandma's not exactly. She paused delicately. Well, let's just say we should focus on the future, not the past. Ice filled my veins. What do you know about Grandma? Nothing official, she said quickly. Just whispers. Hospital visits. You know how people talk. I looked at Mabel, who was watching me with knowing eyes. Ivy had known. She'd planned her wedding deliberately, knowing Grandma might not have another festival. You really want me there? I asked, my voice steady. Of course. We're sisters, after all. Then I accept. Noah, who'd been listening, stared at me in shock. Mabel simply nodded. After ending the call, I opened the folder she'd given me. Inside was not only the garden trust paperwork, but also documentation of every manipulation, every lie, every scheme Ivy had orchestrated over the years, carefully collected and annotated by my grandmother. I've spent years gardening, Mabel said quietly. You learn that sometimes to save right up until pruning season. I thought of Ivy's smug voice, of Ethan's betrayal, of my mother's tears, of 40 years of tradition about to be bulldozed by my sister's ego. The wedding's in 3 weeks, I said. Mabel smiled. Plenty of time for things to bloom. Or wilt. That night I sat at my small desk and made 2 lists. One for the garden festival vendors, volunteers, publicity. The other for Ivy's wedding dress fittings, bridal showers, speeches. My phone lit up with a text from Ethan. Thank you for being mature about this. Ivy was right. You're taking it better than expected. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing. Press release. Historic Community Garden announces record-breaking festival plans, honoring founder's legacy. Let them think I was taking it well. After all, every gardener knows. The most dangerous plants are the ones you don't see coming until it's too late. The morning of Ivy's wedding dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for both a wedding and a garden festival. I stood in the bridal suite, watching my sister twirl in her white dress, when my phone buzzed with an alert from the garden security system. Someone's been through the greenhouse, Noah texted. Files missing. Trust paperwork gone. My hands went cold, but I kept my face neutral as Ivy approached. Zip me up, sister dear. As I pulled up her zipper, I noticed something familiar on her phone screen. A photo of Grandma's desk drawer, slightly open, papers visible. Looking for something? I asked quietly. Ivy's eyes met mine in the mirror. I had to know what she was planning. Imagine my surprise when I found out my perfect little sister was about to inherit everything. She turned, her smile sharp. But don't worry. I fixed it. What did you do? Let's just say certain papers might suggest financial mismanagement of the garden trust. Poor Grandma, getting so forgetful in her old age. Good thing I found evidence of her confusion before she made any legally binding decisions. My mother burst in before I could respond, fussing with Ivy's veil. Everything needs to be perfect today. Eden, please tell me you've handled the garden situation? Actually, Ivy said sweetly, I just heard the festival's been canceled. Something about missing permits and questionable bookkeeping. I grabbed my phone, seeing dozens of missed calls. The local news was already running the story. Historic Community Garden Festival canceled amid financial investigation. I have to go, I said, heading for the door. Leave now and you're no longer my sister, my mother called after me. Family comes first, Eden. Always. I stopped, hand on the doorknob. That's funny. I don't remember family coming first when Ivy stole my fiancé, or when she scheduled her wedding to destroy Grandma's legacy. Don't be dramatic, Ivy sighed. Besides, Ethan was never really yours. He just felt sorry for you. We've been together since before he proposed to you. The room went silent. Even our mother looked shocked. What did you just say? I turned slowly. Oh, please. Those business trips? The late meetings? Ivy laughed. He was with me. Always has been. The engagement to you was just convenient. Kept the family happy while we figured things out. I looked at my mother, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting Ivy's train. You knew. Her silence was answer enough. I walked out, ignoring their calls. In the hallway, I ran straight into Ethan. Eden, wait! He reached for my arm. Don't. My voice was ice. How long? He at least had the decency to look ashamed. It wasn't planned. It just happened. For 3 years. His silence confirmed it. Our entire relationship had been a lie. Outside, reporters were already gathering at the garden gates. I could see Grandma Mabel trying to speak to them, looking frail under the harsh camera lights. My phone buzzed again. Noah, your grandmother's collapsed. Ambulance coming. I ran, but by the time I reached the garden, the paramedics were already loading her into the ambulance. As they closed the doors, I caught a glimpse of her face, pale, but her eyes were clear as they met mine. The seeds, she mouthed, pointing weakly toward the greenhouse. But when I reached the greenhouse, I found it ransacked. Every drawer opened, every file scattered. On Grandma's desk sat a single envelope, the original trust paperwork, torn to pieces with a note in Ivy's handwriting. Some plants need to be pruned to save the garden. Isn't that what Grandma always said? My phone lit up with a final text from my father of all people. Your mother's right. Family first. Come back to the wedding. We can fix the garden situation later. I looked at the destroyed greenhouse, thought of Grandma in the ambulance, of 3 years of lies and manipulation, of a lifetime of being pruned back to let Ivy bloom. You're right, I texted back. Family does come first. That's why I'm choosing Grandma. I turned off my phone and began gathering the torn pieces of paper. Ivy might have shredded the trust documents, but she'd forgotten something crucial about gardens. From scattered seeds, new things grow. 3 days after Ivy's wedding, Grandma Mabel passed away in her sleep. The reading of her will was scheduled for the morning of the garden's annual harvest festival, the event Ivy had tried so hard to destroy. I arrived early to find Ivy already there, wearing black designer mourning wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Our parents sat beside her, while Noah stood quietly in my corner. Before we begin, the lawyer said, Mrs. Finch recorded a video message. Grandma's face appeared on the screen, tired but determined. My garden has always been about growth, not just of plants, but of people. Some grow straight and true, while others— Her eyes seemed to look directly at Ivy, twist themselves into shapes that block others' light. Ivy shifted uncomfortably. To my granddaughter Eden, Grandma continued, I leave the entire garden trust with one condition. It must remain a community space open to all, even those who tried to destroy it. What? Ivy stood up. That's impossible. I have documentation proving Grandma was mentally unfit. Ah, yes, the lawyer interrupted, pulling out a folder. About those documents. We have security footage showing you breaking into the greenhouse to plant falsified papers. Mrs. Finch was quite thorough in protecting her legacy. Color drained from Ivy's face. Mother, father, you can't let this happen. The development deal. The deal you made to sell the garden? I asked quietly. The one that would have paid for your new house with Ethan? I found the contracts in the greenhouse. Our mother gasped. Our father finally looked up from his phone. You don't understand, Ivy's voice cracked. This was my chance to prove I could be successful on my own. Not just the pretty sister, the charming sister, the one who has to fight for every scrap of attention. Fight for attention? I couldn't help laughing. You had everything. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family dinner was the Ivy show. You even stole my fiancé. Because he was supposed to be mine first. The words exploded from her. He was interested in me before he ever met you. But then you started college and suddenly you were the ambitious one, the smart one. He changed his mind. So I changed it back. Silence fell. Our mother was crying quietly. Mrs. Finch anticipated this discussion, the lawyer said, playing another video clip. Ivy, Grandma's voice filled the room again. I'm leaving you something too. The truth. You've spent so long fighting for attention that you've forgotten how to grow toward the light on your own. The garden will always be open to you, not as an owner, but as someone who needs to learn how to bloom without choking others. Ivy sank back into her chair, face in her hands. There's more, I said, pulling out the restored trust documents. The garden's educational program? It needs a director. Someone good with people, who knows how to command attention and inspire others. I met my sister's eyes. Someone who might find that helping others grow is better than tearing them down. Why would you offer me anything? Ivy whispered. After everything I did? Because Grandma was right. Gardens aren't just about growing plants, they're about growing people. Even the ones who've lost their way. Our parents watched in silence as Ivy stood and walked to the window overlooking the garden, where volunteers were setting up for the harvest festival. I don't deserve it, she said finally. No, I agreed. But that's the thing about gardens. They give everyone a chance to start fresh. She turned back, tears streaming down her face. Ethan left. Right after the wedding. Said he couldn't trust someone who'd betray their own sister. Karma's a better gardener than I'll ever be, I said, offering her a tissue. Later, as the harvest festival began below, I watched Ivy tentatively approach a group of children eager to learn about butterflies and pollination. For the first time in years, her smile wasn't performed, it was real. Think she'll change? Noah asked quietly. I thought of Grandma's words about growth and light. I think she already has. Sometimes the hardest plants to save are the ones that don't realize they're dying. 1 year after Grandma Mabel's passing, I stood in the garden's greenhouse, surrounded by the sweet scent of spring blooms. The morning light filtered through the glass panels, casting rainbow shadows on a framed photo of Grandma tending her beloved roses. The school group is here, Noah called from the doorway. He'd stayed, helping me rebuild not just the garden but myself. These days, his smile felt like sunlight. Side 20 elementary school students gathered around Ivy, who was demonstrating how to plant tomato seedlings. Her designer clothes had been replaced by practical gardening wear, her perfectly manicured nails now perpetually rimmed with soil. Remember, she was saying, the strongest plants aren't always the biggest. Sometimes it's the ones that bend with the wind instead of fighting it that survive the storm. Their eyes met briefly. We weren't best friends, probably never would be, but we'd found a different kind of relationship. One built on growth rather than competition. Eden, my mother's voice surprised me. She stood awkwardly by the herb garden, looking out of place in her expensive shoes. Your father and I were thinking about Sunday dinners. I waited, remembering countless family meals spent trying to make myself smaller. We could have them here, she continued. In the garden, if you want. The garden's always open, I said carefully. That's what Grandma wanted. She nodded, then hesitated. I've been seeing someone, a therapist. She's helping me understand things, about choices, about letting one child's light dim to keep another's burning. Before I could respond, a commotion broke out by the vegetable beds. One of the children had accidentally knocked over a tray of seedlings. I watched as Ivy handled it, not with her old dramatic flair, but with gentle patience, showing the crying child how to repot the plants. Some things can't be fixed, I told my mother, but they can be replanted, given new soil, new light. She wiped her eyes. Your grandmother knew, didn't she? That's why she left the garden to you. Not because you were perfect, but because you understood how to help things grow. Even the difficult ones, I agreed, thinking of Ivy's slow transformation from invasive species to nurturing guide. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the greenhouse in amber light, I found an old journal of Grandma's tucked behind some pots. Inside, her familiar handwriting filled the pages with more than gardening notes. Gardens teach us patience, but they also teach us forgiveness. Every plant deserves a chance to grow, even if it starts by growing in the wrong direction. On the last page was a letter dated just before she died. Dear Eden, by now you've learned that some betrayals cut deeper than others, but healing comes in unexpected ways. I didn't leave you the garden because you needed it, I left it because it needed you. Your sister isn't the only one who required pruning. Sometimes the gardener needs to grow too. Love, Grandma. I closed the journal as Noah appeared with 2 cups of tea. The evening class wants to expand the butterfly garden, he said, sitting beside me. Ivy's already drawn up plans. Of course she has. I smiled, watching my sister through the greenhouse windows as she locked up the tool shed. She'd found her own way to shine, teaching others instead of overshadowing them. You know, Noah said carefully, there's still that empty plot by the rose garden. I knew what he was suggesting. The space Grandma had always said would be perfect for a small wedding ceremony. This time the thought didn't sting. Maybe, I said, sipping my tea. But first we have spring planting to finish. Outside, the garden glowed in the fading light, filled with new growth and old memories. Some plants had died, others had thrived, and a few had transformed entirely. Just like family. Just like me. I touched the greenhouse glass, leaving a small handprint next to an old, faded one Grandma's from years ago. Different prints, same garden. Different people, same roots. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's growing beyond what anyone thought possible, and helping others do the same.